this country is at war with Germany.
We shall go on to the end.
I remember the sheets of flame which came up and almost blinded us from our guns.
In the aftermath of the Second World War, 24 of the most powerful figures in Hitler's regime were brought to justice at Nuremberg. Among them was Hermann Göring, once seen as Hitler's heir and still commanding even in defeat. Before the trial began, the US Army appointed a young psychiatrist, Captain Douglas Kelley, to assess whether these men were fit to stand trial. For Kelley, it was a chance of a lifetime to look into the minds of the Nazi elite and search for what made them capable of such evil. What he found was far more complex and unsettling than he expected. His professional curiosity evolved into a disturbing psychological duel, especially with Hermann Göring, a man both monstrous and magnetic who seemed to thrive even in captivity. I'm Angus Wallace, and today my guest is Jack Elhai, author of The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, Hermann Göring, Dr. Kelley, and A Fatal Meeting of Minds at the End of World War II. Jack's book explores this extraordinary relationship, drawing on Kelley's long-hidden papers and medical records. His work has also inspired the upcoming 2025 film, Nuremberg. Welcome, Jack. Thanks for joining me. So before we get to Nuremberg, tell us a bit about Dr. Douglas Kelley himself. Who was he? What kind of background did he come from? Psychiatry was still a developing field.
Douglas Kelley was born in California in 1912 in a rugged far west town in California called Truckee. And Truckee is at the northern end of Lake Tahoe. And this is significant because that is the area that decades before his birth, a group came through the area on the way to the gold fields during the gold rush. And that group was called the Donner Party. They underwent a catastrophe in their trip through the Sierra Nevada mountains. They hit a tremendous blizzard, were marooned in the mountains all winter, and many in the party had to resort to cannibalism of the dead bodies to survive. And I mention this because Douglas Kelley's grandfather, Charles McGlashan, was the first historian of the Donner Party, partly brought about because they lived just a very short distance from where all of that happened. And so Kelley grew up in this family atmosphere that was dark and brooding, not just his grandfather's work, but Dr. Kelley's mother was a dark, dour, dark dispositioned woman who imparted much of that to her son as he was growing up. But he did grow up and he went to school at the University of California, went through medical school. So after his medical training, he also received training in a testing method of the time, still used occasionally, called Rorschach testing. That's the famous ink blot testing. When the war began for the U.S., Dr. Kelley enlisted and was sent to the European theater, where he worked in Western Europe with soldiers who had suffered what was then called shell shock. We would call it PTSD now. And he devised various treatments for them. And the goal was not to necessarily completely heal them, but to get them back into the fighting and into battle. And so that's why he was in Europe when the war ended. And he received a summons to go first to Luxembourg. And he didn't know why, but he learned when he got there, it was to evaluate these top, the German high command, political leaders and military leaders who were being held in a former hotel in Luxembourg. That's where he got the idea that he has this great opportunity, not just to do a simple evaluation, are they fit to stand trial, etc., but what makes them tick, Did they have any common psychoses or serious illnesses that would account for their behavior?
Do we know why he was selected? Because it seems like an odd jump to go from dealing with men with combat stress to suddenly, right, you're now in charge of people who are normally in charge of Germany. Can you figure out, well, I'm not sure what he's tasked with, because he's not tasked with fixing them, isn't he? They didn't want to fix these people. So what is he doing?
What you mentioned is part of the ambiguity of his situation. He was one of the highest ranking, if not the highest ranking, U.S. Army psychiatrist who was in the area. And so I think that was the main reason why he was picked. And he had done very good, highly commended work with the shell-shocked soldiers. But part of the ambiguity of his position was that he was there working for the International Military Tribunal to determine if these men were mentally fit to be put on trial. But he was also, in many ways, their personal physician, too. So where was his allegiance? Was it to the court? Was it to his patients? He was torn, and there were no clear directives for him on that question.
It's a detention centre, isn't it, at Mondorf-les-Bains? That it's not a prison. So what is that? How are these men being treated and kept? Because normally people like Göring, who was there, was the head of state, arguably one of the heads of state. There's numerous people at the end seized the title.
It was a prison in the sense that they couldn't leave. I think they were kept in a former hotel. I think the accommodations were probably okay, better than you'd find in a prison. The rooms that they were staying in, and each of the defendants had separate individual rooms. They had been stripped of all the hotel furnishings, and so the furnishings they did have provided to them were basic and bare, and the food was basic and bare. And they complained quite a bit about that. But yes, there were, Göring was a former government official. Many of the men there were, and Göring certainly expected to be treated as something like a head of state. He didn't receive that level of treatment, and that was one of the things that displeased him at the beginning.
I guess when he's picked up, he must have seen himself as a VIP, even though he was potentially fleeing to heaven knows where. But there you go. How does Kelley go about building a rapport with people like Göring?
One of the interesting things about Dr. Kelley's personality was that he was very gregarious. He was no introverted academic, and he had a high opinion of his own intelligence and abilities. And justifiably, he was a very smart man. And so he was good at talking to people. He was handicapped because he knew no German, but many of the captive Germans did know some English, and he had translators at his disposal also to help out. So he got into discussions with them. With Göring specifically, the first task that Dr. Kelley undertook was to improve Göring's health. Göring arrived at the detention center addicted to a drug called pericodine, and also overweight and with heart problems. And so Dr. Kelley's first task was to get him into better shape, because the last thing the Allies wanted was for anyone like Göring to die in detention before they could be tried. So that's what he attended to first, and then he started giving his battery of tests to these men and engaging them in long conversations. Some of those conversations were sparked by the Rorschach tests, and that's a kind of test that invites conversation because it's all about the subject's interpretation of these abstract ink images.
And how did he assess these sort of top Nazis? Does he find them insane, psychopathic, or Hannah Arendt? I love the phrase of the banality of evil, but I'm not sure if that's obviously written 20 years later. How does he find them?
The banality of evil phrase by Hannah Arendt did come later, and it was specifically intended to apply to one person, in particular Adolf Eichmann. And it did not apply to many of the German captives on their way to Nuremberg. No one on earth would call Hermann Göring and many of the others banal. They were colorful, extravagant, extroverted, talkative guys who wanted, for the most part, to justify to others what they had done during the war. So Kelley's MO was to give him all of this testing with the hopes of finding out whether they all suffered from some common psychiatric disorder. He was a psychiatrist. He was looking at them through the lens of psychiatry. And much to his disappointment, I don't think I'm giving away a spoiler here, he didn't find that. He didn't find what he had hoped to find, which he had called the Nazi virus. There was no Nazi virus. These men were not insane. They were within the normal range of mental health, with the exception of one person, Robert Ley, who ended up taking his own life before the trial even started. And so that caused Kelley to do a lot of rethinking, and ultimately not just rethinking about how he regarded the defendants, but how he regarded his own career. If psychiatry couldn't account for what they did, what discipline would? And he determined that possibly criminology instead was a better lens to look at these men through.
How do you interpret Göring's motivations, in his worldview for Göring to justify what he did? Was he different from anybody else? He was certainly, because he was there, he was at the top for a long time.
And he was similar to the others in some ways. He was a type A workaholic, just like many of the others were. And he was devoted, as Kelley came to think, not so much to Nazi ideology, but to German nationalism, and even more to the flowering of his own power. And Kelley believed that Göring attached himself to the young Nazi party soon after World War I ended because it was a party that he thought he could climb rapidly in, because many of the members were military veterans from World War I. Those were people who regarded Göring very highly because of his service in World War I. It was a path to power. And Kelley thought that was the case with many of the other defendants, too.
Did Göring accept the legitimacy of the Nuremberg trials and the charges against him?
No, he did not accept the legitimacy, or he explained it in terms of, you won, we lost. That's why we're here. And if we had won, you would be here. However, Göring knew it was inevitable that he would be tried. And he also believed it was inevitable that he would be convicted on various charges. And he looked forward to the trial as a platform on which to make his case for Germany, his case for Hitler, and his case for justifying all the different actions that the German government had taken during the war.
I guess they realised they were going to be, or certainly Göring would have realised he was going to be put on the world stage and it would all be reported, so whatever he said would be scrutinised and seen around the world.
He relished that prospect. He looked forward to it despite what he knew the outcome would be.
I was going to ask about Hess as well before we get to the trial itself, because I'm not sure how well known Rudolf Hess is in the US, but obviously in the he flies to Britain in 1941 as Hitler's deputy on a unsolicited peace mission. I mean, he's always sort of seen as a bit of a crank and a crackpot, I think, from the British point of view. How did Hess strike Kelley? Because he's always been in prison for 4 years in Britain. Or 3 years, 3.5 years.
Rudolf Hess is such an interesting figure. One of the things that drew me into this story was a Rudolf Hess artifact that I found when I was first learning about this story. This story developed for me when I found and visited the home of Douglas Kelley's son, Doug, who was living at the time, this was around 2008. He was living in Northern California in a small town, and I'd written to him and told him that I was interested in his father's career, and did he have anything? He said yes, he had some things, and he invited me to come. I came, and he opened his door, and behind him in the living room of his house were 15 boxes full of documents and artifacts. Many of these were items that Dr. Kelley should not have taken from Nuremberg. I don't think they didn't belong to him, but nevertheless, he had them, and there they were. One of the artifacts was a package of biscuits wrapped in paper that Hess had, been offered to eat when he was in captivity in the UK, and he had refused to eat them because he believed they were poisoned, and that the whole object of the British government was to murder him. Another artifact was a vial of about 100 of these paracodeine tablets that Hermann Göring had been addicted to. So Hess presented quite a challenge for Kelley, the psychiatrist, because Hess flip-flopped between complaining of amnesia to the point that he said he didn't recognize Hermann Göring, to later saying that he was faking his amnesia. And then he claimed his amnesia again. So Dr. Kelley's appraisal was that Hess was faking it. Other psychiatrists came to different conclusions. Kelley thought that the sentence that Hess eventually received, life in prison, was justified because Hess was there, he was in control of himself, and he should have been judged as the others were.
If they see the trials as being almost a trial of the victors, how do they respond when they see those films from the concentration camps that get shown to them? What is their reaction?
Those films were shown early in the trial, within the first month of the trial. In some ways, nowadays, we are used to seeing those films or films very much like them. But at that time, and this was in December 1945, hardly anyone had seen films like that before. So everybody in the International Tribunal courtroom was deeply affected, including many of the defendants who were affected in different ways. Some were just obviously made uncomfortable. Some were clearly shocked, and others appeared saddened or were faking being saddened. It had a big influence on them. After the courtroom session in which those films were first shown, there was a big disruption in the prison when the men went back to their cells. A lot of arguments about, was this true? Who was responsible for this? But Göring knew all about it. He claimed he didn't, but there was massive evidence presented at the trial that he knew exactly what was happening in the concentration and death camps. So it made a big impact, certainly on the justices as well. It was a big moment in the trial.
Yeah, my assumption has always been it's one thing knowing about it and another thing having to witness it, which probably they'd never had done. Is there a camaraderie then amongst these Nazi prisoners and VIP prisoners of war? Are they all sticking together and getting their stories straight, or are they all, if they're all motivated by personal power, are they all actually quietly sticking the knives at each other's back and pointing fingers at each other?
Well, I think whenever you get 22 people together in circumstances like that, they will divide into camps. And there were certain pariahs, too, among the group. So there was one camp that was very loyal to Göring and stuck with him and considered him their natural leader. There were some who were pariahs. Julius Streicher was not liked by anybody, and nobody wanted to consider themselves a comrade of him. He had been the editor of a newspaper called Der Stürmer, which was a very anti-Semitic, far right newspaper. And then there were others like Albert Speer, who were more willing to accept guilt, or at least make a pretense of accepting guilt. And they were not closely aligned to Göring. But in the end, I think everybody accepted Göring as the natural leader, and he was the highest ranking, and someone who could or should be a spokesperson for the group.
Intriguing that they felt they still had to hold on to those wartime or pre-war layers of power and authority.
Well, rank, even in prisoner of war camps, rank is important. When people have been used to behaving in a certain way, giving deference in a certain way over many years, that's going to continue even in captivity and even on trial.
I mean, he's not working on his own. He works with, Gustav Gilbert is the psychiatrist who works with him. I'm intrigued, do they come to the same conclusions when they look at these men? It's an imperfect science, is psychiatry.
Gilbert and Kelley came from different backgrounds, not just within their study of the mind, but social backgrounds. So Dr. Gilbert was fluent in German. His parents had been German and had immigrated to the U.S. He was more of an academic. He was a PhD psychologist. Because he knew German, he was able to communicate better, and he got close to a different group of patients than Kelley had. And they came to different conclusions in the end. They were both competitors in the sense that they both wanted to write books at the end of all this. A book, after all, is the key to fame and fortune, right? And so Dr. Gilbert finished his book a few weeks ahead of Dr. Kelley's, once the trial was over. And Dr. Gilbert's conclusion was that these men, that some of them indeed did suffer from serious psychiatric illnesses and should be considered mentally ill, and that could account for their behavior. Kelley's conclusion was almost the opposite. None of them had suffered from serious psychiatric illnesses. And not only that they were not all that notable in a psychiatric sense. They were normal, and that there are people like them all around us in every country, in every era of time, and that we need to be on guard against people like that. And that was his take-home message from Nuremberg. It was reinforced because when he returned to the U.S. in 1946, he saw what he considered to be incipient fascism all around him, mainly in the form of Southern U.S. politicians who embraced racial segregation and used it as their way to climb to the top of the political structure. Cynically, Kelley believed in many instances. And so his message was to combat that in the U.S. and other Western countries. The vote had to be extended to as many people as possible, that narrowing the voter base is a recipe for inviting fascism in. He also believed that candidates for political office should all be given psychiatric examinations to make sure that there were no bad tendencies above them. I would like to see that today. I would love to see that.
I know, but I'm not sure always that politics, irrespective of people's politics, somehow draws people with a bit of a screw loose to do the job because it's, you kind of, whatever happens, you have to put your head above the parapet and you're going to get shot at. So you have to be a bit odd to start with.
Exactly. It draws people who think highly of themselves, maybe are intelligent, but may have very healthy egos and believe in their rightness, despite the evidence that may be against them.
But yeah, I understand his point, and I wholeheartedly embrace it. But it'd be interesting to see. It would be interesting to see if you psychiatrically tested people who they would allow to pass through. How did he interpret? Because 12 of them, of the defendants, are sentenced to death, but Göring escapes death by suicide. After reading the book, it's a point that I'd never really thought about. But how does Kelley interpret Göring's suicide? Does that reveal anything about Göring's character?
Kelley believed that Göring's suicide was a real act of defiance against the Allied authorities. None of the convicted Germans wanted to be hanged because to them that was a common criminal's execution. And so Göring and others had asked to be shot by firing squad instead, which the Allies would not do. So Göring cheated them by swallowing the cyanide tablet the night before his scheduled execution. And by that time, Kelley was no longer in Nuremberg. He read about this in the newspapers. And he not only thought it was an act of defiance, but there was something about it that Kelley admired, that Göring was able to go out his own way on his own terms, just as he said he would very early in their conversations. And of course, when the time came when Dr. Kelley himself was considering suicide, that method of death, cyanide poisoning, came to mind for him too, for the same reasons, to make a statement and to show his distress very visibly. Cyanide is not a pleasant way to die. It's fast, but it's violent. And that appealed to Dr. Kelley for a variety of reasons.
Right, let's pause it there, folks. We'll be back in a moment. What happened to Dr. Kelley after all? Because he had seen the position he got for those prisoners as a potential springboard for his career. Did it spring him into academic stardom after the war?
Kelley was disappointed in what happened to his career after the war. His book, which was titled 22 Cells in Nuremberg, did not sell well. It did not deliver a message that people really wanted to hear, that we always have to be on guard against people like that, and that the defeat of Germany would not be an end necessarily to fascism. So he was disappointed by the book sales, the lack of recognition, and then he was in a career crisis. If psychiatry couldn't explain the way these men acted, then he turned to criminology, and he became a professor of criminology at the University of California. I don't think criminology was as close to his heart as psychiatry had been. He was successful as a criminology professor. He was a good teacher. Students liked him, but he, in his personal life, professional life, grew frustrated. He also came to believe that the U.S. government was against him during the years of the Red Scare, and he deteriorated. He also had a drinking problem that added to his woes, and marital difficulties. So all of that led to a decline in him in all aspects of his life. So it wasn't a happy ending for Dr. Kelley. He died in his mid-40s.
It's absolutely shocking ending the way he goes out as well. He chooses, as you say, chose his own ending.
Yes, he chose the cyanide route. And not only that, took the cyanide in front of his family. And I was very fortunate to have at my disposal an eyewitness to that scene, and that was his son, Doug, who was 10 years old at the time, and who saw the whole thing and heard the argument between Douglas and Dookie Kelley that led up to it, his wife, and was able to give me a lot of insight, not only into his father's character, but also into the character of the marriage and what kind of father he was. But it's a sad story.
It is a fascinating story of a man who he absolutely had the world in his hands in 1945, isn't it? And then it sort of comes crash down. You alluded to the archive. I'm intrigued by the archive. How many boxes did you say there were? 8?
About 15.
15. It's a tremendous amount of stuff. Is that still held by the family?
It was such a large quantity of stuff that when I realized what was there in Doug's living room right before me, I did feel some elation. Wow. And then I felt nausea too, because, oh my God, I knew I was going to have to go through all this so carefully. The bulk of it was papers that Dr. Kelley had gathered during his time as psychiatrist with the prisoners. So there were fat files for each of the defendants. They were fat files because Kelley had done all this extensive testing on them. He had interviewed them, and there were notes on the interviews. There's, the Rorschach results. He had each of the defendants write out an autobiography. Those were in there too, some in German and some in English. And then he had collected memos from the court. All of that was in there. Right on top of one of the boxes was this big framed glamour photo of Hermann Göring signed to Dr. Kelley, with best regards to Major Kelley, all of that. So that those materials now are no longer in the possession of the family. Doug, the son, donated them to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. They have it now, and those papers are being digitized. I'm not sure where they are in the digitizing process, but soon they will be available to the public.
What a fascinating archive. I assume that's a pretty unique archive. That's his military, it's his medical archive. He wasn't doing duplicates for the military.
He may have been, and those went wherever they went. I don't know where they went. I also found a small number of papers related to Kelley's time in Nuremberg at the U.S. National Archives, and then there was another collection of papers at the University of California in their archives. But it looked to me that those papers, that after Kelley died, someone had just cleaned out his office and dumped all of that material into boxes. So that's what that was. Initially, I was discouraged because there was not a lot of material about Kelley in publicly accessible archives. But that was before I came into contact with Doug and found out how much there was.
15 boxes.
Yes.
That's the kind of thing that people dream of, turning up resources like that to slowly chew through.
And it took a long time, many visits to go through.
I bet it did. Is it handwritten or typed?
It's both. There are handwritten notations and notebooks that Dr. Kelley kept, and then there were typed materials. The Rorschach results were typed, and many other things were typed. Some of the autobiographies that the defendants wrote were handwritten. There was a lot of handwritten material from the defendants, notes that they had passed to Dr. Kelley. And in Göring's case, there were letters that he had written to his family from prison. And I had not known before about the existence of those, but they were an important part of the story.
Because it reminds me of the fact that Churchill at the start of the war appreciates that he's going to write a book about the war at the end of the war. So he starts collecting his papers as the war's going on, so he has his archive. And it sounds like Kelley's doing something similar. I know I'm writing the book, so right at the start, I will start collecting my papers so I have everything ready to go on what's going to set me up for life.
And he gathered not only his own papers with that book in mind, but Dr. Gilbert's papers too. He took some of Dr. Gilbert's material. So the bad feelings between them were justified.
How much did Gilbert's book outsell Kelley's?
It did. And I think it's better known now than Dr. Kelley's is. And it was more influential because it told a story that I think more people wanted to hear, that these men were deviants, and that which is a comforting notion because we can't control deviants. They're going to be there no matter what we do. Whereas if the people like this are part of the general normal population, then we are obligated to try and do something about them.
Well, Jack, thank you for joining me. It's been fascinating to explore the story of Dr. Douglas Kelley. Loyal listener, if you'd like to learn more, Jack's book is The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, Hermann Göring, Dr. Douglas Kelley, and a Fatal Meeting of Minds at the End of World War II. I will put a link on the website and in the show notes. And as always, if you enjoyed the show and want to support what I do, you can find the details on how to become a patron at patreon.com/WW2podcast. Next time, I am hoping to be joined once again by Anthony Tucker-Jones to look at the closing months of the war in the West. Until then, I'm Angus Wallace, and thanks for listening.
Jerry 88mm gun hit our town, blew us the hell out of it.
Stalingrad can never be repaired.
As Allied Commander-in-Chief, I have granted a military armistice